A little over 4 months after Narendra Modi and Vladimir Putin met in Sochi on the Black Sea coast, they are due to meet again on October 5th for the annual bilateral. So what's on the agenda? Let's get a sense from Ambassador Arun Singh here. Sir, what do we expect from this annual meeting?
At one level, maintaining the regularity of these meetings is critical because as you know, this is the 18th or the 19th meeting and the process started in 2000. And that's important because after the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1990, there was a little bit of a drift in India-Russia relations because the new Russia was focused more on building its relations with the West. It was only when Vladimir Putin became the president and the difficulties started arising in relations between Russia and the West on account of expansion of NATO to the east towards Russia, that Russia started looking once again at its old relationships. And I think it was in that context that there was a focus again in Russia on reviving the old relationship with India, bringing some focus on it, and started this annual dialogue. So that it has been sustained, the periodicity maintained is an important signal. So given that, I think certainly they will use this opportunity to review where the relationship is, and the relationship is critical in many areas. In terms of our defense cooperation, the relationship with Russia is important. More than 60% of our defense inventory is from Russia. In terms of our space cooperation, there is ongoing. In terms of civil nuclear energy, while we are talking to US, France and other countries for partnership in civil nuclear energy plants, it is only with Russia that we have established an ongoing cooperation. 2 plants in Kudankulam are functional. For 2 of them, phase 3 and 4 construction has begun, and phase 5 and 6 the agreement is being worked out. So if you look at these areas, and then in energy, many of our companies in the oil and gas sector have made huge investments in energy exploration in Russia. So in all these areas, the relationship with Russia is very important.
Is it driven because of Putin, or is there a broader organizational, institutional push behind this?
I think it is both. Certainly in 2000, to some extent, it was driven by Putin because there was a drift after 1990. But with that process having started, there is an organizational push also because, as I mentioned to you, in defense, in civil nuclear energy, in fossil fuels, in terms of investments, both by Russian companies in India, Indian companies in Russia, there is a solid basis for this partnership. And as Russia's relations with the West have become difficult, they will be looking at consolidating some of their traditional partnerships. So there is both a Putin dimension and a more underlying structural dimension.
The relationship seems largely centered on defense. And is that good or bad, one? And second, there's the issue of the S-400. Your views on that?
So I would say that the relationship is in an important way focused on defense because defense cooperation between 2 countries always reflects the level of confidence in the partnership. If we are buying more and more defense equipment from Russia, it's because we have confidence in the relationship. If Russia is willing to sell to us, it's because they have confidence in the relationship. So there is a history of defense cooperation. But that having been said, and even though almost 60% of our inventory presently is of Russian origin, we are diversifying our sources. We are buying more from Israel, we are buying more from France, we are buying more from the United States. So this will inevitably diversify. And while Russia's relationship with Russia has an important component of defense, as I mentioned, civil nuclear energy partnership, investments in oil and gas sector are also important dimensions. But of course, we would like a relationship to be multidimensional, to have a focus on trade and economic issues, people-to-people dimension. And there, the relationship with Russia doesn't have the same strength as some other relationships. For example, if you look at trade, our bilateral trade with Russia is about $7 billion. Yeah. With the US, it's $120 billion. If you look at Indian students, there are about 4,500 Indian students in Russia. There are 200,000 Indian students in the United States. Or if you look at the Indian origin diaspora, about 30,000 Indian origin people estimated to be in Russia, and almost 4 million in the United States. And if you look at new technologies in the civil space, digital technology, areas where India has huge economic stake, again, the partnership there is with Europe and with the United States. So certainly the relationship with Russia is critical in many dimensions, but in many other areas, some of our other relationships, especially with the United States and Europe, take on additional meaning.
And the S-400?
On the S-400, clearly, from all the reports that have come out, it would appear that the government of India has assessed that this is an important system, important platform for India's defense, and that they are continuing their discussions with Russia for acquiring that system. And there's bound to be progress in whatever way during the visit of President Putin. It's an area of interest and challenge because in terms of US legislation, a country buying a system like the S-400 from Russia could come under unilateral US sanctions. And recently the US has sanctioned China for purchase of a similar system. My own assessment would be that US would not sanction India, because US has a growing partnership with India, including in defense, and they are looking at partnering with India also in the Indo-Pacific. There is a growing economic and technology partnership. The US would not like all that to be impacted by imposing unilateral sanctions on India, because if they do that, the sense in India would be that US is not a reliable partner. So my own assessment as of now would be that if India were to go ahead with the S-400, US would find a way not to sanction India and grant a waiver to India, something that is now permitted under US legislation.
Looking at China and Russia, they are extremely proximate, and some would say Russia is virtually in China's pockets. How does it impact on us?
Certainly it has an impact, and it's interesting that you may recall that in 1971, the United States at that time built a new relationship with China because they wanted to wean China away from the Soviet Union as part of the global balance of power. Today the situation is that China has become strong. Its GDP is 5 times India's GDP. Its defense expenditure is 3 or 4 times India's defense expenditure. And now, because the relationship between US and Russia has become very difficult, Russia is veering towards China, because the options for Russia have become curtailed, and it has no option but to look at building more economic and other relationship with China. It is looking at supplying energy resources to China. So that's bound to happen, and of course from our perspective that does become a challenge, because we would not like that Russia in its own approach to India or building its cooperation with India, be it on the economic civilian side or the defense, is conditioned or curtailed in any way by concerns related to how it might impact their relationship with China. But something that we'll have to watch, and not just China. You'd have seen that Russia has now started opening up to Pakistan, something that they had not done for a long time. And I think from many analysts I hear that China is encouraging Russia to do more with Pakistan. And that's something that Russia is listening to, part of its sort of messaging to China, and therefore with Pakistan they're now doing military exercises, they're looking at, they have been supplying helicopters, so they are playing their own relationship, and I think it all plays out in the context of how India is also diversifying its options. We are building a relationship with Europe, with the United States, whereas earlier our relationship with the Soviet Union and then with Russia was much stronger. So it's an inevitable global flux that is happening, and we'll have to manage and deal with that.
And even on Afghanistan, there appears to be a divergence. The Russians are talking to the Taliban, and we are not.
Absolutely, and that's interesting because before 9/11, India has been working closely with Iran, with Russia, against the Taliban, because at that time the Taliban were controlling almost 90% of Afghanistan, and it was the Northern Alliance controlling just about 10%. And our interest lay in trying to ensure that the Taliban did not control all of Afghanistan. And so India, Iran, Russia worked closely together. Today the situation is very different. We have excellent relations with the government in Afghanistan. We have provided a lot of assistance in Afghanistan, which has had a good impact. Today India is assessed as the most popular country in Afghanistan. But we have been able to do that within the broad security paradigm provided by the United States. And so we don't have any difficulty with, at present, the continued US security presence in Afghanistan. But Iran doesn't like that, Russia doesn't like that. And Russia, therefore, from all reports, has reached out to the Taliban, reached out to other elements. And so there is a slight difference. But then we are also talking to Russia trying to see how much coordination is possible. You may have seen that recently there was a report of a meeting of national security advisors of Iran, China, Russia and Afghanistan along with India that had taken place in Tehran. So clearly we are also keeping that outreach open.
So last question, as the US congressional elections, they come nearer and the crescendo on Russia's involvement, so-called involvement in the American political process gets underway, will there be greater pressure on India to kind of cut down the breadth of its relationship with Russia?
I think the decision makers, policy makers in the United States understand the nature of India's relationship with Russia and the importance of that relationship. It's a relationship with a long history. Russia has given us political support at critical moments in the international context, including in 1971. And therefore they understand that India will maintain the autonomy of its decision making in terms of its relations with Russia. So while there may be noise and some articulations, I think there is an understanding. And ultimately, even from India's point of view, even as we build our relationship with the United States, deepen it, it has to be asserted that we will maintain the autonomy of our decision making. On issues, we will take decisions based on our own interests. And it's important to maintain and sustain that. Otherwise, we will be pushed repeatedly to take decisions based on preferences of others. And that's not what we want to do.
On that note, Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you very much.